So hello and welcome to Ask the Icon, a live web series, first of its kind in India for working professionals. I'm Kaushik Majumder, author and workplace challenge consultant. Needless to say, the impact of the, the pandemic all over the world has pushed us into a time which is unprecedented. And if you are a working professional, then you must be and worried person today. I'm sure you have a lot of questions with very little clarity. And that's exactly what we intend to achieve on every episode of Ask the Icon, I'm afraid. So if you are a working professional, then Ask the Icon is your show in which we try and find answers to your unanswered questions. On every episode of Ask the Icon, a guest icon from Indian INC would join us live on Facebook and would address your questions. So without further delay, further ado, I would like to introduce you to today's icon. Let me confess, I'm thrilled because our today's icon is an eminent influencer, a celebrated leader, and an inspiration to many, including me, yes. Ladies and gentlemen, the icon we have got amid us today is the Chief Executive Officer of Barclays back India, Gopal. Thank you very much, Ram, for joining us on today's episode of Ask the Icon. To me, and also I can say this, on behalf of each and every viewers who are watching today live, it's a huge honor having you on Ask the Icon, taking their questions. Viewers, before I hand it over to Ram for his opening comments, let me tell you, when I called Ram and told him about the idea behind Ask the Icon, I was apprehensive. I was thinking, will he like it? Will he agree? However, as soon as I finished, I tell you what exactly Ram said. He said, I'm not an icon, but it's a great idea. I like it. So let's do it. I'll do it. And his gesture reinforced my conviction on the idea of Ask the Icon. Thank you so much. So your opening comments, please, Ram.
First of all, Kaushik, thank you for having me on the show. As you say, at times of adversity and crisis, each one of us has to try and search within to find out how we can contribute. And I think, Kaushik, you're doing a great job in trying to get us all together and share whatever little we can in terms of insights that could help us cope with the situation around us. Thank you for your generous words. And to, working professionals who've joined this call, I know the situation has been very challenging. This has taken perhaps a toll on all of you. I look forward as much as, your questions. I'm also hoping to learn from you in terms of how you're going about managing this. This has been titled as the Great Lockdown by WHO. After the financial crisis in 2007, 2008, this is upon us, and frankly, in our careers, maybe one of the most defining health crises that we would see. We are all trying to make sense of things around us. We are possibly coping as best as we can. But one of the things that I always find encouraging is the sense of community, which Kaushik is trying to foster. The sense of our willingness to learn from each other and to try and, think through for ourselves what we can learn from this and how we might think about our future optimistically. So with that said, over to you, Kaushik.
Thank you very much, Ram. Thank you very much indeed. So before we move on, the question answer session, those of you who have not read my book, The Process Pro, let me tell you, Ram has shared his insights on corporate processes and systems in The Process Pro. And if you are a working professional, you don't want to miss those super powerful and invaluable insights. So Ram, on this show, I would ask you questions that I've received from the viewers who are working professionals. So with your permission, should we proceed with Ask the Icon, please?
Please go ahead, Kaushik. I hope you can hear me loud and clear.
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear. There is some echo, but I think I'll be able to manage. But so the first question is from my side. There are people who believe that life would not be the same once the loss of human lives due to the epidemic is contained. Do you subscribe to the views within the context of working class people? How do you see the new norm shaping up in workplace, the job market, and the work culture?
Fantastic, Kaushik. I think you've covered a broad spectrum, right? You're talking about workspace, you're talking about job market, you're talking about world culture. And all of this, I think, has been our existing beliefs, models have been tested. And before I answer the question of do we believe that there will be a new normal, let me try and talk about these three different facets that you touched on. So the first one you spoke about was workspace. I think if you look at some of the large players today, I think one of their key distribution vehicle has been the points of presence. Yeah, these branch outlets that people have spent so much time, so much money and effort to try and help create. Now, one of the things that this crisis has taught us is that remote working or work from home, from just being a concept which many believed could work only for these tech workers or maybe in the Silicon Valley, I think has proved to be, shall I say, one of the ways by which we have tried to all cope with the current situation. So in terms of workspace, remote working, my sense is that I'm sure after things stabilize, we would be reflecting upon this time and say to each other that it was this summer of 2020 that we actually saw the prospect of telecommuting actually take concrete shape in India. So I fully subscribe to that view. So that's quickly on workspace. You spoke about the job market. Now, this has been, and this debate is on the television. This is on top of our minds. This question about lives versus livelihood. It is a problem. It is a huge challenge, unprecedented one for people and society. And I think if you think about what has happened, this crisis has led to, in the initial short term, a lot of losses around. So if you look at aviation industry, if you look at travel, if you look at hospitality, in all of these industries, not just hiring freezes, but also job cuts have actually happened. And as we look into the second order effects, my sense is it will soon be upon the auto industry, auto ancillaries, one could say the retail industry. So this is certainly going to be impacting the job prospects for many, many people. There are varying estimates on the losses, but I wouldn't put too much emphasis on the numbers. Fair to say that this is an unprecedented challenge on the livelihood side. Not just people who are working professionals like all of us, but also for self-employed professionals, this MSME, they have actually seen literally the orders stop or fall to zero almost overnight. So long-lasting impact on the job market. And finally, to talk about work culture, several things have changed. In the old model, we were still believing on command and control, if I were to use that as an example of a leadership style. Now, distributed leadership is in vogue, It is unrealistic to expect that the central headquarters somewhere in India or in the globe would have complete understanding and assessment of the situation on the ground. Just look at the way how India itself is dealing with the reaction to the pandemic, right? There are distributed leadership. Each of the state governments are coming forward with their own plans, and then there is a central coordination team trying to define what out of these are central elements and what can be left to the states to drive themselves. So distributed leadership is one thing that I feel has come of age. I'll pause here and maybe we can take more as we go along.
So the next question is related to, again, the current situation, So it has come from Robin DeCosta. His question is, news suggests that working professionals are worried about their job. In this situation, what would be your suggestion to the leaders when it comes to motivating their team? Considering almost all are connected from home, therefore the proximity influence is nil. Please, over to you, Ram.
Yeah, thank you, Kaushik. And again, I think there are two parts to this question, I would think. The first part of this question is about should we be concerned? And I think one of the things that I think we ought to do is to accept the situation, right? If you understand there's a model that explains how one reacts to a crisis. And I think it is both individual. We go through a range of emotions, right? There is a portion of our brain that deals with emotions, and another part of the brain that deals with the cognitive aspects, that analyzes things and then comes out with a calculated and a considered reaction. And sometimes in a crisis, what happens is this cognitive part of our brain gets suppressed by the emotional component of the brain. And I think so, therefore, it is incumbent on all of us as leaders to try and anticipate how people react to crisis. There is initial, it's a well-known framework, but initially there is shock, there is anger, there is denial, and then there is an element of bargaining that happens. And then you slowly move down that curve and you go through a phase of being depressed, which is, I think, what people are talking about, and then slowly get into acceptability. Yeah. And if we can help people navigate these various phases which they go through faster, reduce not just the time that it takes through each of these stages, but also how deep it impacts an individual. I think as leaders, that is our role. And yes, if we can get people from the initial shock to acceptance and finally to hope, you spoke about that in the earlier question about the hope of a new normal. If we can get that pace accelerated, I think it will serve us all well. For that, we need to do two things. First and foremost is, try and understand for ourselves how we feel about the change ourselves, right? So, there are various emotions. There are people in our families who could potentially be impacted. So there is a feeling of being, shall I say, scared about what happens to our loved ones. There could be feelings of isolation. It may not have happened to our immediate family, but because, as you say, we are cocooned, we are far off from our colleagues, etc., that could give a sense of not belonging to anything in particular, which is what I think in the historical in the previous sense our office was meant to serve, a sense of belonging and inclusiveness. You could touch and feel what you're part of. Now that's no longer there, so you feel a sense of isolatedness. And I think I would think that the first phase in all of this is to accept the situation before we can think of how we get there. So then I think to the question that was being asked, about how do we lead teams, that is the second facet for it. So the first facet, we try and accept it, and we do two things for ourselves. We focus on our strengths so that we know how we can contribute uniquely in this moment of crisis. Each one of us have got different skills to bear, and in a team setting, what is it to do with our strengths that we can bring to bear? That's one component to think about.
Yep.
The other component to think about, I would think, would be what drives our passion. For every action, there is a why, right? If we can focus on, we go to work because we want to earn a livelihood, because I want to have a safe future for my loved ones. That itself could be a strong sense of motivation as to why we are playing where we are playing. So individually, think about your strengths, think about your passion. What is it that creates meaning for the work that you do? I think that's on the personal side. Then there was this question that this gentleman asked, which also dealt with dealing with teams, because you are a leader, you want to try and, put out the new normal and a sense of optimism for people. In that, I would think that you should talk about, two aspects. One aspect is a sense of being available. Yeah, it is all right. Not every call needs to be about how are you getting along with this particular job, particular task. It could be just an emotional check on how are you doing, what feels priority for you. Just help make it clear to the individual or colleague that you are available for them to open up to. And the second one that I would think is, beyond being available, it is about over communicating. Right. Because typically what happens is, because your emotional part of the brain is playing a dominant role, playing a dominant role. Right. You need to communicate simple things that register. You could do that with sharing examples, personal anecdotes, sharing things using figures, charts, etc. And even if it's about doing something or task, it should be about trying to communicate why that is important. So on the individual side, think about your strengths and passions. For the team, think about being available and think about over communicating.
Right. So, Ram, since the question is about motivation, of course, when I, interviewed you earlier for my book, you had given me two, examples from your life, which I, remember very distinctly, because those two etched in my mind since that day. And I want you to please share with, the viewers those two, real life experience that you had, and I'm sure viewers are going to love it. So please.
Thank you, Kaushik.
Yes, please.
I think this goes back to my early days. This is about 25, 26 years ago when I first was starting out in the industry. And one of the things that I got for myself is a small wooden plaque that you can keep on your table. And in that plaque was engraved these words, that it is better to suffer from pain in the neck by aiming too high, yes, than a hunchback by aiming too low. And I said to Ram Gopal, the future CEO. And I think that was on my working desk ever since I started. So, this was about, the incident where somehow, I felt that my calling was trying to, create some bit of impact in large companies. Yeah. And that credo about aiming too high and not, suffering the fate of a hunchback by aiming too low was something that I held myself personally accountable to. That's one thing about motivation.
Yes.
The second thing about motivation, this is a conversation with Kaushik. I had the opportunity to engage with one of the top leading, sports scientists. And this was a gentleman who engaged with the South African cricket team. And as a team, we were reflecting on the question about what does success mean for an elite sports person. And Pat came the response from this scientist, sports scientist. He was telling us that for an elite athlete, it is about thinking about what are potential scenarios that they may encounter on the field tomorrow or when their moment of truth comes, and playing that out in their minds and trying to work out potential solutions for those. So he was talking about it in the context of cricket. So think about this as somebody who, let's say, the opponent team has one of the most feared fast bowlers, or maybe somebody who does a lot of short pitch deliveries. So it is about anticipating what is going to happen on the field tomorrow and making those adjustments in your mind about how you would expect and how you would deal with them. And that, he said, was how the elite sportsman defined success. I felt it very motivating.
Absolutely. You know, I met you, I think, last time when we discussed this 1.5 years back. And as I mentioned, that these two were so inspiring. And also your own life. I mean, I've seen your photographs, and also I'm seeing you now and on that day as well. There has been a huge change, and you're also, working towards that coveted, what do you call it? That recognition, Ironman, yes. You're running for that, and I would love to know how far did you go, and are you still in the run, or where do you stand on that, the Ironman?
Yeah, thank you, Kaushik, again for this. This is a bit of personal indulgence, so let me talk about it. I'm going to turn 50 come July, and the way I was thinking about this, and again, hugely motivated by a story from Milind Soman's life about how at 50 he turned an Ironman. So this is basically an endurance sport. It requires you to do 3.8 kilometers of swim, followed by 165 kilometers of biking, and then a 42-kilometer of run. You've got to do all of that within 16 hours. So I have been actively training for it. And I was thinking that, this July, I had actually joined or enrolled in one of the races. This was to happen in the Eastern European country of Azerbaijan. So everything was set for me to appear, but things have changed dramatically since January. So I don't know whether travel is likely to happen or not. So now the new fascination for me is to do, and this again motivated by somebody that I know in my personal circle, who kind of attempted the equivalent of Mount Everest climb by climbing the staircase of their own apartment complex. So this is about, doing in a period of, in fact, in my, the friend of mine had done this in 2.5 days. I'm trying to do it over 75 days. You climb 40 floors every day, and you do 30,000 feet. That is the equivalent of scaling the Mount Everest. So things to motivate yourself in times like this.
Yeah, that's what makes an achiever. That's what makes an achiever.
So
thank you very much for sharing your experience. I'm sure the viewers are going to be absolutely delighted. Okay, and the next question is with regards to, I've got it from Tanaya Sen Verma, yes. So now she asks a question: being qualified and experienced, why we lose job to a person who is less qualified when it comes to skills? So what would be your opinion on that?
So this is about experience versus, shall I say, new age skills, perhaps. Yeah.
I would suggest, I mean, he actually, as she put it, again, I'm just putting the question forward again. Being qualified and experienced, why we lose job to a person who is less qualified when it comes to skills? So,
Okay. Less
yes,
qualified, and I'm not too
little
sure.
experience. Yeah,
Yeah, experiences versus skills on one side, and maybe some
attitude.
other consideration on the other. If you think about that as a context, in my mind, I think to Tanya, all I would say is that please don't let yourself be defined by one or two instances where this may have played through. I think, in a typical sense, if, let's say, for example, if I were to hire somebody, we look at more than performance, which is a mixture of experience and skills.
Right.
One of the yardstick that we use is potential, which is the ability and the capacity for the individual to be able to take the company forward in new ways than prior. So please do not get discouraged. I don't know the context in which your comment was being made, but generally
Yeah.
speaking, I would think that 9 on 10 experience, skills, and to top it all, the right attitude and potential is going to win the game in the longer sense, in the longer run.
Right.
And maybe this is also a good segue for me to talk a little bit about how does one cope with failure. Maybe it is some bit of, shall I say, a feeling let down. It is indeed the case for even every successful person, I think, goes through a period where things don't go their way. So I think the ability to bounce back and the ability to bounce back better than what you were before, I think, is at the heart of what one has to focus on as we go through these difficult and trying times. So I think that is the message from me to you, which is just focus on the process, go back. If you were to do that thing again, that interview or that particular test again,
Right.
what would you do differently? And please rest assured that those would be one of examples. In the long run, experience, skills, attitude, potential, these will certainly win.
Yep. So the fourth question is again very it's close to my heart. What would be the impact on the campus recruitment by the Indian INC due to the COVID-19 outbreak? How do you see it going on after the break?
Yeah. And we touched on this briefly in your opening question around what do you think about the job market?
Yes.
In my mind, I think all of the large corporates, we included, I think we are trying our best to ensure that, whatever commitments that we have made, we fulfill them, including, the range of options or range of measures being taken. One is to, just like we have the moratorium on, loan repayments. Similarly, many companies have adopted a stance where they would do a moratorium on business changes that leads to retrenchment. So that is one aspect. The other aspect that large companies are thinking about is not just about moratorium on changes leading to people impact, but also for those people who have been recently displaced, who have not been able to find themselves a new role. There is also economic assistance that companies are trying to put together. And then for specifically, I think the question was around campus recruitments. For those commitments that have already made, I think most of the companies are trying to facilitate work from home for these new recruits, in such a way that, while they may not be immediately be able to operate from the principal place of work, but they start understanding the ethos of the company and all of those things by virtue of being part of this remote workforce. So many things people are they are on their own doing. In fact, not just being focused on short-term results, but being focused on long-term. There's this classic difference between stakeholder, or in the past it was, shareholder being the principal driver of what motivates company behavior, to now something called conscious capitalism or stakeholder capitalism, which talks about not just good for the company, but good for the society and good for the community.
Right.
There are many examples that I can cite about not just on the job market side, but also in terms of contributing to the community. Companies are coming forward. So it's hard to retain objectivity at this point in time, but I want your listeners to go away feeling a sense of optimism that companies are doing their best to ensure that we keep the economy and the company moving forward. So those are continuing to be at the center of what drives and moves us.
Right. Okay. Then it's about, okay, the next question is from Ravi Jha. Ravi Jha asks the question, I'm technically good and also qualified, however, due to poor communication, especially my nervousness in crunch situations, I lose out on many jobs, which is frustrating. What would be your suggestion in dealing with such situation? And in my initial days also, I faced that kind of situation. Then I used to get nervous, and I used to mess up. So yes, your take on this, please.
Yeah, and I think this is possibly this is prevalent. I would think in most of the I'm generalizing here. Most of the Asian psyche, I think the ability for us to be assertive, confident about the skills that we represent, and how do we build that? I think this is not a one magic wand and then suddenly you are the self-confident, self-assertive person. I think it is about trying to this is not just for this particular question, but I'm giving a much more generic framework, Kaushik. Mm-hmm. This is about whenever you want to make behavioral changes, I think it is important to break that up into smaller pieces and then set yourself up to do some rituals around that. So let's assume that I want to start, shall I say, meditating. So it isn't that I simply close my eyes and kind of come what may, try and lock my eyes shut for an hour or 2 hours or whatever it is. That is the short way of not getting anywhere. But this is about starting very small to say that, okay, let's kind of see whether I can hold my attention to whatever you want to focus on for, let's say, a minute. And you try and convert that into a ritual. Ritual as in specific time of the day, specific place in where you're comfortable with, specific environment, and then you try and see whether you can do it for a day. And you try and do that over several periods of time where 1 minute then becomes comfortable. Then you stretch yourself to say, okay, let's today try 2 days. And that's how this entire confidence building game can also play out. So inside your own setting, try and see, can I volunteer myself for doing something that isn't my comfort zone? For example, I'm typically not the one who raises my hand when my boss asks for an opinion. Can I try and do it? So remember what I said about leaders trying to make themselves available
Yes.
and over communicate. I think one of the important things that leaders, you are a leader only by virtue of trying to create a sense of psychological safety in that community that you are chosen representative of. So if you feel comfortable, psychologically safe in your team, that is the time when you can set up some experiments. Can I raise my hand to be somebody who does that job, which typically I don't raise my hands for? So being assertive. So maybe can I be the one who talks about why a particular initiative is not the good thing for the particular company that she or he belongs to should embark on. It could start so the minute you start talking about things that are not the prevailing opinion, then you suddenly put yourself in uncomfortable position where you have to defend your views, defend why you say a particular thing. And that's how it slowly starts. Yeah. So many successful people have been here. So it is nothing to run away from, nothing to be afraid of. Please start thinking about what some of those small steps that you can do to build that level of confidence, that level of self-assertiveness. Maybe my initial request to you is, why don't you think about doing a small self-assessment that will tell you what you're truly good at. So maybe you can think about this as a strengths assessment. Yeah, there are many tools that are available for 999 rupees. You can do a complete inventory of what your strengths are. Yeah, reach out to Kaushik, reach out to me. I can give you some links of that inventory. Yeah, maybe once you're confident about what you stand for, maybe it is easy then to think about what are some of those things that you can do given your strengths.
Right. Right. So thank you very much. I mean, it's wonderful because I also faced this situation which took me, ages to overcome. But it's about, I mean, to become a good communicator, one has to communicate. There is no two way about it, right?
Yeah.
So next question, which has come from Naina Das, is a very small question, but very powerful question. How do you deal with poor performers? How do you deal with poor performers in your organization?
Yeah, I think this is as old as organizations, right? As in, there are two theories around people. One theory is that one is intrinsically motivated, and therefore the role of a leader, manager, the role of a company is just to foster the right environment so that people who are intrinsically motivated just excel or thrive. Yeah, that's one school of thought. The other school of thought is people per se shirk responsibility. People per se are task averse, responsibility averse. You need to dangle carrots in front of them in order to be able to get them to perform. And I think you have to decide for yourself which school of thought that you belong to. Right. And in many ways, it's not about one is right over the other. I think it is par for the cause. Right. You got to mix your repertoire in order that depending upon who you're dealing with, you bring to bear different management styles. Right. So dealing with poor performance, I think in my mind, I can't emphasize this school, the theory-wise school, which is if we can give people, in fact, as leaders, again, I just want to reemphasize that point again. As leaders, I think there are two key roles that we play. Mm-hmm. First is to try and create that psychological safety net where people can be truly themselves. There is so much research around how the power of diversity, how it is important for people to be themselves and not try to mirror or be, authentic leadership. I think you would have heard a lot of topics about it. To be true to yourself, just bring yourself completely to work. I think if we can foster an environment where people are themselves, I think you have a good chance of trying to create an engaged workforce. And once you can create an engaged workforce, I think there is a direct correlation between being engaged and being productive. So the second piece is try and create some bit of meaning and purpose in people's task. So, the classic story, I'm a mason, I'm building a church, vis-a-vis I'm just laying, I'm doing my job of just applying some cement to some bricks. You focus on the drudgery or you focus on the larger piece of effort. You think about the frontline health workers today. I think they can describe their job as, take a swab and put myself at risk, and they can focus on all the drudgery that surrounds their work. But you think about what is truly motivating and uplifting part of their role, which is that they are making it possible for people to live in such a challenging environment. If you think about it, suddenly there is a spring in your step, there is a sense of purpose in how you present yourself. So yeah, I think in terms of poor performers, please do think about these two things. Right. About trying to create a safety net for them, and the second one is try and see whether they can identify some purpose or meaning in the work that they have to bring to bear. By and large, these two interventions work to get people to move to the other scale.
I mean, since we sort of kind of focused on the leadership on related to this question, the next question is again related to leadership. How do you deal with your people who are not convinced with your solution to a particular problem? How do you get them on board? And this question is asked by gentleman Anand Kumar. Anand Kumar, yeah, please.
Okay, very, very good question, Anand. I think our typical notion of leadership is one where we believe the notion of leadership is that the leader knows the solutions, the leader commands, and everybody kind of falls in line. This is one of the absolute myths about leadership. Yeah, in today's days, I think leaders are right through in the organization. It is not titular, it is not positional, but it is contextual. I think that is the first thing to be said about influencing people, because there seems to be this thing that thou has the right opinion and thou shall want to prevail upon others. Far from it. Thou is always almost invariably wrong. And if we can take an approach that we can learn from others, I think we are better served, generally speaking. Yeah. So the ability for us to be mentally flexible is one of utmost importance. And beyond that, general principles of persuasion or influence carry. There is this principle of reciprocity. This is the principle of paying forward. You first, listen and provide respect so that others can listen and provide respect. Yeah, so there is this classic reciprocity that builds up, and you got to be leading that by being the first one off the block. So that is something that comes to my mind. The other one around influence typically comes from expertise. There was a question earlier about experience, skill set, potential, and attitude. In my mind, if you have an expertise around a subject, typically you tend to, for that particular topic, you tend to carry the conversation or carry people with you. But again, please be aware that you may many times be blindsided, because in your mind you think you are the expert, and therefore even though when people around you are telling you that that ain't possibly the right step or right measure, because you treat yourself to be the expert, you tend to be, not open about listening to others. Yeah. So in my mind, the best way for you to be influencing others is first and foremost, be open to be influenced yourself. Yeah. I think if you get that equation right, 90% of it gets sorted out. And there is one thing that I've, I've, I've found it works, and maybe I'm passing it off as a template for you to consider, very similar to be open for influence, is always think win-win. The best negotiation is where you feel just like your counterparty, that you could have pressed the case a little bit more. You also feel you've left a little on the table for the other person, and the other person also feels you have left a little on the table for the other person. A classic win-win for both in many ways, I think works. Yeah. So be open for being influenced.
Right.
And then the second one is, please do think in win-win. If you are anchored to these two principles, I think the rest of it is, follows.
So yeah, sorry. I've been, so it was from Umesh Vaswani. I've been working in sales in FMCG, putting 12 hours a day, having no work-life balance. You being an achiever, what would be your suggestion for people like me on how to deal with the work-life balance? So I was also in the same situation. I just wanted to know, what do you think about that?
I think in terms of work-life balance, I think this constantly, this comes up for discussion. And I think, the research around it, articles around it, the literature around this is, I think the way we are framing this is potentially at the heart of it. We are thinking about this as work-life balance, as in trying to bring both of this into some kind of equal status. In my mind, I think it is about work-life integration. What do I mean by that? This is about realizing that there will be, as we move from being a rookie in a company and as we navigate the ladder and move up in positions of responsibility, at different points in time, there will be different things that are that needs to occupy our priority and our focus. So this thing about work-life balance, I think the fact that through our life, as we move from situation to situation, we have to be equally weighted on work and life is something, as they say, chimerical, illusionary.
Right.
So I think we've got to think about this as doing something, and doing something because we believe in it, we like it, and because at this point in time, that occupies our attention. Remember, we spoke about trying to find meaning in effort. So
Yes.
I pose it this way, that as long as our endeavors are meaningful, I think the search for balance will go away, and it will just be a case of us focused on something because our heart and soul is in it. And therefore, this question of does this take a back seat versus something taking a driver's seat will not arise. I think that's the first thing that I wanted to say. Think about this as work-life integration as opposed to work-life balance. The second piece is one of the things that I want to tell all of you is, what is the one thing that we've learned out of this crisis is about how each one of us are trying to maintain some bit of sanity between, there are cases where, in fact, the euphemism or the analogy that is being driven now is this public reality show where unwillingly we are with our spouses playing on a reality show. We are all cocooned within our own houses and we are going about doing things. And one of the things is that we are trying to find for ourselves what this equation is that brings within us a sense of, stability, calmness,
Yes.
etc. So maybe that is what this gentleman Umesh is asking, and
Yes.
it is different for different people. I
Yes.
could say that, given where I am, maybe it gets easier, and that is one thing that I've found in my career. As you navigate up the hierarchy, this gets easier. Maybe when you're starting out, when you're trying to prove yourself, I think it gets that much more harder because you want all of the things at the same time.
Right.
That brings me to my second point, which is that maybe just with everything else, our entire, so think about what, there's something called the science of happiness. And, I would urge all of your listeners to try and Google search for it. There's a gentleman called Dr. Tal Ben Shahar, who's kind of teaches the most popular course in Harvard, and that's about the basic science of happiness. And one of the things that he talks about, there are two myths about happiness. One is that the more that we try and drive towards happiness, trying to find it, the more it becomes a mirage. And
Yes.
that is what I would possibly tell your young listener, which
Right.
is, I think the more you try and create that perfect balance,
Right.
the more it will become elusive. So think about this as a short-term priority, one over the other, and you're doing it because you believe in it. That then becomes mentally, it becomes easier to navigate them.
Excellent. So there are many more questions, but we have run out of our time, stipulated time. So thank you very much, Ram. I'm sure viewers have found the answers immensely helpful. Now, viewers, you know the drill. Please go ahead and hit the like and share button. For regular updates, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and press the bell icon. So for any comments and suggestions, or of course, if you have any questions that you want to ask to the icons, please use the comment section. And yes, I haven't forgotten my promise. So the special gift for the standout question of the week. So Ram, would you please tell us one question of the day that you found either most innovative, relevant in today's context, or you found interesting? If you can please share with us rather, please. Not the
I think
name.
I think the question around influence is what I think is most pertinent. In today's distributed leadership and flat organizations,
Right.
command control is long dead. I
Right.
think the new age is one about navigating your thought process through complex organizations. So I think the question on influence is one I think is a key takeaway.
So it was by Anand Kumar, how do you deal with your people who are not convinced with your solution to a particular problem? So Anand, I'll send you the amazing kit to you once I'm done immediately after this call. So thank you very much again, Ram, uh, for your time and taking all the questions. So any closing comments, please, Ram?
Thank you, Kaushik, for having me. Thank you, listeners. I think this is a great idea. And I think our response to it is going to define how you're going to shape it. So, count on me. You have my full support. One last thing that I would like your listeners to think about is this concept of anti-fragility. This is not a new term. This is a term coined by an economist called Nazib Talim. And recently, I've been interacting with several of my industry friends where we were talking about how anti-fragility is different from resilience. Resilience talks about bouncing back to original. Anti-fragility talks about bouncing back with strength better than what we were when we entered it. I hope that all of you find the path to developing your anti-fragile muscles. Please do stay safe. This is, as we think about our life, in the larger scheme of things,
Yes.
this is just a transitory moment. this doesn't
True.
in always define ourselves. So please do stay positive, stay safe,
Excellent.
and more power to you, Kaushik. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. So those who have missed it from the beginning, you can catch the full interview on my YouTube channel, Process Pro Kaushik Majumder. Looking forward to see you in the next episode of Ask the Icon with another icon with presenting another interesting perspective and lots of learning like we had today. Till then, with the icon himself, Ram Gopal, this is Kaushik Majumder signing off. Thank you very much for watching Ask the Icon. Thank you very much. Thank you.